everybody, and welcome to the second instalment of the Mystery Blanket Club. I can hardly believe it's now March. So we're moving on to the second set of patterns. So I hope everybody's getting on okay. I've had quite a lot of emails from you, some very positive comments coming back about the project. And it sounds as if a lot of you have made a really, really good start. If you haven't completed your February patterns, don't worry, it is fine, you can catch up. In today's blog, I'm going to include some video techniques for eight different things to help you with this month's squares. Before I do that, just a few things I want to talk about. First of all, the parcels. Now, as far as we are aware, everybody now has their first yarn parcel. The last lady that we heard from was in Chile and she's just received her, so she's very, very happy and she can start knitting. If any of you are still waiting for your parcel, can you please just let us know and we'll do our best to try and find out where it is. You should have received it by now. We sent them many, many weeks ago. So hopefully you're all sitting there with your knitting needles, with your yarn kit, ready to make a start on this next lot of squares. A few people have been a little bit concerned about their tension. Now, you were asked to test your tension over stocking stitch. If you've achieved that tension, all good and well, or close to it, that is what you need to try and do. But in the project, there are many different stitch structures. There are cables. Oh, let the cat out the bag. Forget I said that. There are lots of texture stitches. You've had a few so far. You've had some lace stitch, you've had some beading and other bits and pieces. Because you've got lots of different stitch structures, this will affect the tension of your squares, i.e. some stitch structures will create a tighter tension, some will create a looser tension, hence that very annoying thing when I keep asking you to change needle size. There is a very good reason for that, is to keep the fabric to the same width as you work up the square. So blocking and pressing is one way to resolve any sort of tension issues. So if your square is coming out too long, you can use blocking and pressing to ease your square in. And alternatively, if your square is coming out too short, you can stretch it out and smooth it out to the correct measurements as you block and press. I had to do this with my Fair Isle squares. They were slightly tight on the width, but with a good block and press, they've come to exactly the right size. And in fact, all the squares I've knitted have blocked all to the correct size, even if I did have to ease some of them in and out. But it does work, so give it a go if you're concerned. We've had just a couple of reports of knots in the Merino Light DK. Knots are something that unfortunately happen. They happen in yarn. It's annoying, I know, especially if you've just threaded on all your beads and then you find a knot, but it does happen. If you are getting more than 3 or 4 knots in a ball, then do let me know. If you're getting the odd one every now and again, I'm afraid that's just what happens sometimes, and we just have to sort of get on with that and cut the knots out. So I do apologise if you found knots, but hopefully there's not been too many. The chart for square 16 I just want to talk about because it's a very dark colour, that dark tanzanite, that dark navy blue. I thought it would be a good idea if the chart was done in a lighter colour. So the chart has been drawn up with a pale blue background, which means you can still see hopefully all the details on it, such as all the symbols, and there's a little bit of writing on there in white too about the chain stitch. We found that when we drafted it up on a dark background, all those symbols were very difficult to see, so that's why we've done that for that square. So the techniques I'm going to cover in this blog are the thumb method, which is my preferred way of casting on. It's not by any means the only way to cast on or the way that you need to cast on, but it's the way that I prefer. And I have been asked by quite a few of you over the past few weeks about this technique. Then I'm going to show you how to sew in ends. This is something else which I've been asked a lot about, and there is a way that I sew my ends in to make them as neat as possible, so I'm going to share that with you. Blocking and pressing, which is so very important. It just drastically changes the whole look, the whole quality, the whole feel of the knitted squares. So I'm going to take you through that process, and hopefully if you haven't started blocking your squares, then you will do after watching my video. You are going to be picking up stitches. That's if you choose to pick up stitches rather than cast on for a new square. So when you knit squares 9 and, I think about this carefully, and 16, which are in this month's batch of squares, they are built onto squares below them. So you either pick stitches up or you cast on a separate square. Picking up stitches, if you can do that, is just so much better. I think it's better because then it eliminates one seam in the project where you have to sew together at the end. It makes the job at the end of the project, when you piece the blanket together, much quicker, because you will then have vertical strips, 7 of them, that you can piece together. So I'm going to show you how to pick up stitches, and I'm also going to show you the ferrule technique. And we dipped into this in a small way in the first set of video blogs. I showed you the very, very basic alternate colour, one colour in colour 1, next colour in colour 2, and so on. So this month I'm just going to move on to square 9, which still involves exactly the same technique, but we haven't just got one stitch in one colour, one in another. We've actually got a different pattern of stitches on every row. So I'm going to show you the stranding technique, which you will need to knit that square. Remember that if you don't want to knit ferrule, there is an option 2 square that you can choose instead. On square 16, the King's Robes, there is some chain stitch, so I'm going to demonstrate that to you. There are, I think it's 24 small circles. I did them in batches. I set myself a target of doing 4 to 6 each session I sat down, which made it much easier to do because there's quite a lot to do, but it does finish off the square very nicely, so they're important to do. I'm also going to show you some sewing together. So when you have completed square 2, and just to make absolutely clear to everybody that squares 2 and 3, which are in your March patterns, you must knit them separately. You cannot pick them up from the square below because they are going to be positioned on their side in the strip. If that's not clear, then if you look at the piecing diagram in your Mailout, you will see that they are laid on their side rather than, so that the knitting is going sideways rather than vertical. So when you've completed squares 2 and 3, you could actually sew them into place. I would suggest that you do this because that means, again, that you're kind of, you've started a little bit on the finishing process. There won't be so much to do at the end when you complete the blanket. So I'm going to show you how to sew square 2 to square 1. So that will be sewing the cast off edge of square 1 to the side or selvage edge of square 2. So it's sewing stitches to rows. Then I'm going to demonstrate to you how to sew together squares 3 to 2, and that will be vertical mattress stitch. So we're sewing rows to rows like pieces of fabric. So I'm hoping those demonstrations are going to help you this month. Feedback so far has been pretty good, and I've heard through the feedback that people are finding the techniques easier to handle having that demonstration. So I think it would be a very good idea to read the rest of my blog before you cast on for any squares this month. There's lots of other tips about the squares and other things about the club which I've written about in this month's blog. So give that a read, then perhaps get yourself a nice cup of tea, grab a nice biscuit, and I would say get knitting, get those squares knitted. If you have any queries, you know where to find me. You can email me and I answer all emails as quickly as I can. Keep sending in your stories and your photos. It's lovely to hear from you and to see what you're doing and to see how your squares are going. And if you've got any tips to pass back to me that I can share, that's great too. So have a wonderful month. Enjoy your March squares, and I will see you back here again in another 4 weeks. Have fun.